Welcome to Stock Talk, a podcast that draws on the experience and advice from people within the livestock industry. I'm your host, Kirsten Williams, and today we are joined by two of the big guns of the Scottish beef industry, where we have got Mr. Gavin Hill, SAC beef specialist. Hello, Gavin.
Hiya.
And we have got Mr. Robert Gilchrist, the Chief Exec of the Aberdeen-Angus Society. Hello, Robert.
Hi, Kirsten. How you getting on?
Good. So I think I'm probably going to struggle for a word in edgeways with the two big guns of the beef industry here. But I wonder if we just start with the big topics just now within the beef industry. And Gavin, what's the most common queries that people are phoning you with just now, asking about beef-wise?
That was a good question, Kirsten. But actually, at the moment, it's probably as good as it's been for a while in terms of what issues we've got out there. We're going to find that folk have housed a wee bit later at the moment in certain areas, and that's really been quite good. So really what we're looking at the moment is it's ration time, as I always say, formulations for the cattle as they come in. So the questions that we get are quite on formulations, rations, what's the cheap feed this year, what should we be feeding with my silage, analysing that side of things. The second thing is a lot more conversations, as you well know, in the markets, what's happening with the beef markets. We've had wean calf sales, store cattle sales, how it lies with the finished cattle at the moment, cows as well. And obviously conversations about breeding sales as well. There's been some good breeding cattle sales as well. So it's been a bit of everything, but mainly the trade, I would have said, where we are with the trade, it's been pretty buoyant. But you do get a lot of other questions, we've obviously had the FFIS grant system's been, but that's quite good because I usually just pass it on to the offices after that because it's not really under my remit to be doing it. Farmers have got plenty of questions out there, but let's remember they've been through a very, very good spell, but they just never know what's around the corner.
I think it's quite interesting what you're saying about the trade there as well, and thinking of the breeding sales. And Robert, you've just had bull sales happening as well. There's a lot of questions being asked just now, I would say, about what is the best cow for the future? What is the best cow for sustainability? We keep hearing that word, don't we? And what kind of replacement strategies people should be looking at? Should they be buying them at the current price they are? Should they be breeding their own? What is your thoughts, boys?
And you're asking Robert Gilchrist from the Aberdeen-Angus Cattle Society about best breeds.
There you go, job done right. Can we just hang up and just call it at that, shall we? We'll just all go home.
This is going to be an interesting conversation.
Look, I think we've got to be. I'm going to pinch Gav's line. The right animal in the right place. I think that's got to be what the whole game's about. We just step back a second first and then come forward again. We can't get away from what Gav's just been saying there. The supply is tight and the price is strong. So what's probably most interesting from my perspective looking there is there's confidence again. I have a friend who I spoke to last year. His father passed away last year, and shortly afterwards, he was in he was really down because he sort of said, my dad spent all the 70s and all the 80s producing all the government wanted because that's what they said. And then come the 2000s, we were pilloried as an industry because we did all this alleged climate damage. And so, he was quite kind of frustrated, and the price was all right then, but it's not what it was now. Well, that same man's now throwing heifers back into the mix and bulling as many as he can. From being kind of rock bottom spring 24, he's now flying high autumn 25 as the price is coming. And I think the whole industry's in that place whereby we're all looking and thinking, actually, things are not so bad as they have been. And so, sustainability is a word that's bandied about a lot. But sustainable just means being able to keep going on. And if there's no money in the game, it's not sustainable. And so actually, this is probably the first time we can actually truly have a conversation about sustainable beef industry, because there is actually money in the game and sustainable cows. And so, yeah, things are looking a lot better. Cows for the future, well, buying versus breeding, it's a perpetual argument, isn't it? If you've got a herd of 45, 50 cows, which is your Scottish average herd, then you're going to have to run two bulls, one for replacements, one for terminal, if you want to retain your own replacements. And so you could find yourself almost working at cross purposes. It's not easy to find a dual purpose animal. I would argue you don't get such a thing as a dual purpose animal. I don't know if Gavin wants to start that fight yet, but we'll maybe come back to that in a wee while. But you know that realistically, you want your maternal genetics and your terminal genetics. There's not a lot of bulls, no matter what you do, in one package offer that. So, in terms of retaining your own progeny, especially if you're going to try and grow a herd, it's difficult. And 40 cows, 25 to the bull, 25 to each, well, 20 odd to each bull, and that's going to leave you, give or take, 10 replacement heifers. There's not a lot to pick from in 10 replacement heifers for 40 cows. You're into small numbers. So buying in, despite the fact I've spent many a day in front of an audience saying, don't buy in, you're bringing in disease. At the same time, I've come round more over the last while to, if you can find the right person with the right health status, maybe buying in is not such a bad thing. Let somebody concentrate on producing good quality heifers for you and buy them in.
And when we're talking about there, then the cost of a bull, potentially giving you 10 replacements that you then have to pick from your criteria against. Gavin, you've been quite involved with costings. What would you say is a kind of a replacement cost that would be okay? You've got your high ones, you've got your low ones. But when we're in this current market for buying breeding stock is where we are, where's affordable?
I think back to what Robert was talking about at the moment. We now have a situation where cull cows are worth a lot of money. They could be £2,000 plus. Now's the chance to get rid of cows that are inefficient for you in good state, good condition to get £2,000 plus. By crikey, it makes it far better to go and buy replacements than or even breed your own replacements when we've already got a replacement at cost of £2,000 that you've been paid. So that makes it really better. And I really think what's happened now is that more and more farmers are getting rid of cows in good form because they're bringing in more replacements. Now, we can't all bring in replacements, we'll talk about that, but when these replacements coming in, it's going to make your herd more efficient because we're looking at efficiency all the time, look at the calving interval thing, and that's really helping. I think we've got to break down later on exactly what our cow is that we're going to be looking for in the future. But now is the time, with cull cows, if you remember way back in BSE time, were worth £300. Folk did not get rid of the cows and their herds became inefficient. Then everybody took fright when the value came up and said, our cows, our numbers are dropping. Well, they're dropping still, but we still probably produced as many calves. It was just inefficient cows that we were actually getting rid of as well. So this is a big breeding thing at the moment. But what we are seeing in the markets, and Robert back is up, there's a huge confidence with the breeding sales. But what we're also seeing is huge confidence in the breeding sales of good maternal type cows. I think if you go and look a couple of weeks ago how the blue greys were getting on, it was phenomenal. £1,000 increase. Their ability, as we always say, cow for the environment, calf for the marketplace, is pretty damn good at the moment to increase as well. That confidence needed. I've noticed in the Scottish Farmer 2 weeks ago, 500 cows were up for sale. That was folk dispersing their herds. But you could see by the reports, these 500 cows were going into other herds. They weren't as actually going to the abattoirs, take the calf off and go into abattoirs. So there's this confidence of folk want to increase their numbers at the right time, the right place if they can afford it. What a lot of folk try and do is increase their cows without having to stretch their overheads and pay more overheads, more sheds, buildings, men, and what we're doing. But actually, just the point we raised at the start, Robert and myself both said there is confidence throughout the sector, but let's break it down a little bit. If you take the boys that are producing and selling wean calves at the moment, extreme confidence. Most of them are up between £400 and £600. If you go and look at the store cattle trade, they're doing really well as well. You go and look at the boys that are producing all the way to finishing, they're doing well. But those finishers that have had to come into the market in the last few months, and again buy these forward strong stores, are finding at times they could be paying £2,000 to £2,200 for cattle, that finding that when they go to sell finished cattle at the moment, they're only getting £200, not even £300 more. So I'm feeling the pressures maybe on them more, of the big finishers. A lot of finishers are buying big store cattle, I'm saying, with very little margin to work with at the moment. So they're not maybe having as much confidence in the big time. But what's helping them this year is obviously the cost of feed, barley, and that's helping. But got to break it down a little bit, there is these people that are buying big stores at the moment that we're hoping that the deadweight price goes up so they can get a margin at the moment.
And where should the end price be?
Oh, fantastic question. The one we've all been waiting for, Kirsten.
Yeah, I did some rugby coaching in the wee lad when he was a bit younger. We used to call that one the hospital pass, Kirsten. Gav, you want this one or will I? I mean, is there a right answer?
I can start off and then you give your view. Kirsten, you always say to yourself, where does the end price need to be? We've got to remember at the moment, when you're producing store cattle to the finisher to the abattoir to the retailer, if the retailer's going to turn around in times and say it's got too expensive, we're seeing a less demand coming in, then you've got to watch, because obviously more imports are coming in and then you've got to take it back. But I think, Kirsten, more to me is not what the end price should be, but it's having more confidence and stability. To go and get at the start of the year, Robert, back us up in about April, May, some of the finishers were getting 720 pence plus. Within about 6 weeks, they were down at 650. How are we, when we're told to budget and market all the time, how can we do a business plan with the banks and everything like that when we really don't know what we're going to go and get? I feel that what really, when you talk to a lot of the finishers and producers, what really would like to see happen is saying something like, oh, right, let's make sure if the prices stay stable as it is, costs, I mean, you could go to 670, 680. But what they want to see more of, and I'm trying to push more and more, is that we have a bottom level that price won't go below like 650. When you do that, wow, does it bring confidence back into stores and finishers that they can actually budget better and be better where they are. They're not interested. This 720 was a false economy, and most people will agree with that, but it can force it because it just has a knock-on effect. We have to get it balanced right, but we need stability and more confidence.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I'd take on from that as well, Gavin, I think you nailed it a minute ago, is don't forget at the end of the day, what we're actually producing is something to go on a plate. And if the person can't afford to put it on a plate, you can't have a high price. And, we're all happy with where the price is at the minute from the farm gate perspective, but at the same time, there's word out there, the retail trade of the restaurant trade of or the restaurant demand of beef is down about 20%.
Yes, that's right.
So if restaurant demand of beef's down 20%, look, I'm going to rant on this one. Everyone calls it cost of living crisis. It's not a cost of living crisis. It's inflation. It was inflation in the 70s. It was inflation in the 20s. It's inflation now. We're living through a period of inflation, and prices have gone up, but chicken has not risen like beef has. And our consumer is moving out of our category and into chicken, and that is what's been seen at the restaurant level, and I dare say it's also what's been seen at the retail level. And as long as barley and wheat are trading where they are, and soy is trading sub 300 or about 300 quid, as long as they're trading where they are, there's not the same pressure on the chicken price to come up to try and level it off. So I'm always happy to see a good return on the farm gate price for beef. But you've always got to watch that differential to the competitor proteins, to chicken and to pork, both of which are not catching up at the minute.
It's interesting what you're saying about the recession there, because there's a trend as well, isn't there, that since COVID, people have not gone to restaurants the same as what they previously would, and instead they're going to buy a good steak or a good cut to eat at home instead. So with kind of changing habits and behaviours, does the beef industry have to change its habits and behaviours? Do we need to look more towards ready meals and luxury? Like as times are changing, has the industry changed in its marketing?
I think it has. I think moving from catch weight to fixed price on steaks, what was that, 6, 7, 8 years ago? That made a big difference on steak sales. And it certainly helped the steak side of it. But at the same time, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's a difficult one to really put a name on it.
I don't think it might naturally come, Kirsten, that we have to change what we're doing. I think there was a point of clarity. Robert and me were never 100% sure whether the actual Scotch within the restaurants has gone down 20% or only is 20% now. So I think it's only 20%. Robert thinks it comes down 20%. But it just shows you that when you go into a restaurant and you're seeing 30 to 40 pounds of steaks for a steak or a fillet of sirloin, folk are not touching it. The supermarkets are cheaper than that. Folk are not touching it because of the pound of chicken and pastas and that elsewhere, what we're doing. But what we find, and I've pushed for quite a while, is that the beef trade might itself change. We're only down a certain number of cows now, 384, whatever it is it's going to come out with next, of what our numbers are of cows. And what we need is, if you're under the label of Scotch beef, you need to make sure that you're able to supply supermarkets 52 weeks of the year, all the time, critical mass, as we've talked about. But I really think the future could well be with something like Scotch beef, that it only goes into sort of butchers, specialist retail outlets, but the rest of it's exported. And that's why it's like a bottle of whiskey or some Kellogg's cornflakes. Wherever you go, the further away you go from home, the more it's worth, like a bottle of Scotch whiskey. Because we could find that what we're really finding is, with the way the supermarkets are set up, is the future will very much be beef from the dairy, Irish beef, or whatever other country is bringing it in at the moment. That's what it could be, because they know they'll get consistency of that all the time. To go and try and put Scotch beef into the same label as them, well, just no way could we handle that, because we need this extra. Further away you go from home, the more it's going to be worth. And that's why you kind of look at bodies like QMS. If QMS are out there going to be doing that, and they are doing that, that's the top cuts need to be away there, and we'll bring in others. But that the beef industry may have to change itself. The unfortunate thing about it is, when you get short of beef, everything comes up in value. Even the poor quality cuts they probably come up more in value than anything else. And that's why we try and differentiate ourselves. So it's not easy to differentiate yourself when you're short, because everything comes up. So when you've got an abundance of meat, you can try and differentiate yourself, but not at the moment, where we don't have that luxury that we need to. We've got to have that Scotch beef in the label, and we've got to make sure we sell it to where it's going to be worth more.
Yeah. I did think today's podcast was going to go more towards cow of the future, and we have gone right into the markets, haven't we?
That's deliberate, though, from Robert and me to avoid.
You said we'll see where we go, Kirsten. You didn't say where we're going to go, so sod it. Me and Gavin are going to go where we want to go.
I wonder, though, if before we go back to the cow of the future, if we maybe think about the future of the Scottish herd. So the trend has been that the herd is going down. We are seeing some people expanding, but quite often the people that are expanding are on low-cost systems. And I just wonder if it's worth both of you, maybe some of the low-cost systems that you guys both see working really well. What is the highlights of those? What makes them work well and allows people to increase their cows?
Well, for on my side, the low-cost systems, they are not new. Some farmers have been doing them for a very long time, and folk used to go and say, oh, why are they outwintering cows? Look at the state of them, things like that. No, they've got the job sussed. If they get that job, I keep saying the cow for the environment, calf for the marketplace. And what we're seeing over the last 15 years is a real change, the type of cow. Now, we can go and throw it out and say, well, that cow and that cow, but remember, you're talking about Solaires and stabilisers and Lings and Angus crosses and blue greys and Welsh blacks. That cow that's just a little bit more fat about it, it's got cover, it's got fertility. It can really, it can really forage for itself. It makes a big, big difference, fertility as well. And they have that out. But what's crucial is they have it in outside in areas. Well, they still have quite often the big commercial terminal bulls that are able to go on it, and they hit the marketplace at the moment. But so much development has happened in the UK, especially in Scotland, and you've been involved in it, so has Robert and myself, over the last 15, 20 years of outwintering systems. Outwintering systems can vary from like blue greys in the top of Behaviours, right down to people that are just doing deferred grazing, they're doing kale, brassicas, the whole thing, making sure all the bales are in the field as well at the same time. But what they're doing is they're actually they're having this lower overhead cost, because we've done costings over the last 22 years. You can be sometimes talking at some people £600-700 of overhead costs through the winter. Some folk have got 7-8 month wintering. That's fine, but not everybody can outwinter. And these are the big, big costs that are coming into these places. The big boys are able to expand, but have lots of sheds and buildings, usually have alternative income and money coming in elsewhere for them to be able to do it. But I really do think a lot more folk have grasped into these outwintering systems and have developed their cows very much to take it, because it reduces. And look at the work that you've done, Kirsten, yourself. We plug here for Kirsten's working for the beat, and that have made a big difference. And we're changing. But these cows can adapt, and they're great to adapt, and they're also able to produce that calf that we're wanting. And the big push we've seen lately as well, which I find is fantastic, is this no fence, virtual collar, whatever you want to call it, where they're able to actually now put cattle and cows into big areas that have never been vegetated for a long, long time. And what a difference that would make is to reduce folks' costs and still bring in biodiversity, environmental, carbon zero, all these measures, hugely achieving so many objectives. So real big push, and we've seen that. We've seen the numbers coming down. The Angus actually, it's slightly since 2015 increased their numbers of maternal cows, but its other breeds have certainly decreased, some of the big continental ones, and we've seen such much an increase from Shorthorns, Blue Greys, Lings, Silairs, Stabilisers. Great jobs that they've done there. We are actually, as you talked about earlier on, Kirsten, we are adapting. We are adapting, but the weather's changing. But where we find it quite hard, Robert, to back us up, it's certain areas where you're hitting 7-month plus winters. It's a big cost.
I think Gavin used the word, and it describes myself as well, and it's one of my favourite thing to actually make the difference, and it's fat. Fat is what makes a difference, and it takes us right back to the market piece as well. We were pilloried and made to produce lean beef, and we took half the flavour out of it, and we took all the resilience and all the fertility out of the cow. And Gav mentioned it there. We're putting the natives back into it, and you can see that when you put fat back into the job, you can see cows that can stand out winter, because that's the other part of it. You can. There's no sense in out wintering something that's thin-skinned with no fat in it, because she'll look like the wrath of God by the time you get to springtime. You need to have an animal that can stand it, and so the fat piece, for one, you've got the ability to carry that excess flesh is like carrying feed into winter. You are actually literally carrying utilisable megajoules on our back. Every condition score, give or takes, a bale of silage or a bale and a half of silage. You've got a huge reserve there for a start. Then you take the fact you've got that intramuscular fat. If you've got an animal with intramuscular on, or you've got something there that's got that instant energy reserve when the weather goes squally, or you get one of those cracking nights of frost or horizontal rain. You can't be a bit of horizontal rain, can you? So you've got that instant energy reserve there. But the beautiful thing about it is we've come back to that as a point of making the animal better in the environment. But actually, on the shelf, you're also making it something that's far better to eat and far tastier to eat. So you're actually feeding back to the consumer and giving them something. So I think there's a really symbiotic piece here whereby you've got a more resilient animal that's more productive and more profitable on the farm, and your consumer's going to enjoy it more and come back for more of them. So we've spent 30 years in the wilderness of lean meat, and now we're coming back to something that might actually be, good.
The big push, if you remember, 25, 30 years ago, right up to 15 years ago, whenever it was fat and leanness.
Yeah.
Leanness got rewarded all the time. EBVs rewarded leanness.
They did.
Robert and me were involved quite heavily, and I certainly pushed to actually make sure that all the EBV traits for fat were actually reversed, where you actually rewarded for more fat rather than leanness. Now, that took time to bring into certain breeds, and it's still happening at the moment, but we have to have that cover coming in. But a lot of industry was looking for leanness in the bulls, but they were looking for leanness in the cows, and that's why they had a type of continental type cow, because it produced lean. Now, why was that? Because these cattle could be fed and fed and fed and kept going. And these were the times where weight paid. When you could get to 500, 550 kilos dead weight, industry still paid you. But when they said we're only going to pay you to 400, 420, that's when you got an enormous shift back, when we started having to change back the traits, and so fat got rewarded. And you went looking for a type of cow with that fat cover that cattle could be finished sharper, where before we were just allowing this weight. And one of the things very clear about it is that's fine that we've now got the industry down to 400, 420 kilos dead weight. It's more efficient. That's the way to go. Everybody can do it quite profitably and things. But stick to that. Don't become short of cattle and decide weight pays and we'll pay for any weight that's going on it. Then that allows industry, that really knackers industry, and industry has to go and say it again, we need to change our types again. We really need to stick at that. Too much at times. And you do worry that if we do get short of cattle, they do look for yield. They do look for size. That's the kind of thing coming on.
And that goes back to the steak as well. You back to that fixed price versus catch weight steak. That was part of why the carcass weight had to come down, so you get a steak that would fit within the price point.
I think as well, Robert, you were saying have fat. The other thing that you probably have as well is a bit of a thick skin. Having that thick skin to get you through the winter.
Here. Like an elephant, so it is.
And that's it. Like some sites that are quite exposed, like it's so important to have that bit of shelter around these systems, because the amount of energy that you can lose on a horrible horizontal rain, windy, miserable day or night. Think of it yourself. It is a huge amount, isn't it? So it's ensuring that the energy is there for them as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can be talking 25% more energy a day just to stand still. Not to do anything more other than just stand still among that sort of weather. So it's a real kind of pressure piece. And yeah, it's, as Gavin said, there are folk who look at the outwintering thinking, so go, well, I saw my neighbour do it, it didn't work. But the neighbour maybe picked the most exposed boggy site with a thin-skinned cow. And of course it wasn't going to work because, it was set up to fail. So it's, you do have to, it's not just about throwing the cows outside and hoping for the best. You do actually have to plan this and think about it. And, you say shelter, water, can the ground carry them? Because if it can't, well, don't even start. And you're back to the 7-8 months inside. But, I mean, even inside, the other thing with inside is, and I think it's something that the beef industry probably sorely could do with considering more, but doesn't really, is cubicles. We love straw-bedded courts, but they're actually quite an expensive way of keeping cows through the winter, especially this year with some of the straw yields going about. Whereas cubicles are it's a slightly more fixed infrastructure, but you can put a lot of cows in without a lot of straw on cubicles if it's done right.
I think you've got to remember we've got area differences, Robert, down in the south here in the west. We've had abundance of straw and grain, and everyone's doing all right. But you're quite right with the cubicles. You've got three systems you always talk about. You're talking about straw bedding, you're talking about slats, you're talking about cubicles.
Yeah, and slats will always come under pressure as well, won't they?
Slats will always come under pressure, but as long as we've got mats in them, that's what it is. And if they go and say to themselves, well, we wanted them to be in the natural environment, that's outside, but then they complain outside because of the weather conditions against us. You can't win it all way. What I like to see is when slats go in and when cubicles go in, it really shows commitment by industry because they know they can't be doing a lot of other things with them. Okay, they can look at pigs and that in the future. But when you've got those that want to create straw-bedded courts, they're creating straw-bedded courts because, okay, they maybe have the resources of straw, B, they like it, but others see it as they might think it's alternatives that they can do with these sheds in the future. I think slats and cubicles always gives me more assurance that they want to invest in industry. And the amounts of slats and buildings that have come up lately have been phenomenal. But slats are lovely to see in terms of how good they've made them. But every system seems to be under pressure, and to go and say everybody should be in straw bedding is impractical and cannot work, and it's a costly business for us in the West.
Yeah. If we now think about the cow of the future, so if we're thinking about replacements, we have said we want something that is carrying fat, that can that's fertile. We've spoken about fertility. What else are we looking for in that? So say we're breeding our own. When are you starting to look, and what are you looking for?
Feet and legs is another big one. I think it's been an industry thing that across industry has been maybe a bit forgotten about, is feet and legs, because it turns out that to eat grass they kind of have to stand up and walk about a bit. I think good feet and good legs is always a great place to start, because and structure is a critical piece. Get that right, and then the rest falls in. I'm assuming you were fishing for EBVs there, Kirsten, but I see the whole thing as a holistic piece. It's not just about the EBVs, it's not just about the structure, it's not just about the pedigree. You have to look at all this as one composite piece. There are things that you can see right in front of you that, it's all well and good if it's got the best numbers in the breed, but if it can't walk, then it's no a lot of good to you. Likewise, if it can walk beautifully but has pretty bang average numbers, is it going to do the right thing for your herd? So, yeah, I think it's you've got to look at this holistically, and I think the real thing that we probably really need to sit down and look at is, what do we have at the minute? Where am I? What do I actually have? And once you figure out where you are, then the next bit is, where are you going? What do you actually want to produce? And you've got to start with that. It doesn't really matter. God, I can't believe I'm going to say this, and I'll probably get kicked in the backside off half my board, but it doesn't really matter what colour of hide the animal has. If you don't know where you are and you don't know where you're going, well, good luck to you.
If you look back at a number of years ago, Kirsten, we used to always actually bring in replacements quite easily, because we simply went to the dairy herds. You got your Hereford Friesians, your Limousin Friesians, or even my dad's time, where they got the old Irish cattle that used to come in and be traded from the east. But it kept a simple system. Because that's where you're getting replacements, so you could concentrate quite a bit at home with maybe terminal bulls, because you weren't having to put them over heifers and all that, because they usually came in calf or whatever it was, and keeping it very, very simple. But now, because of the dairy industry over a number of years, very much pushed towards milk, they went from good structured cattle into what they call toe tracks, where they only went for yield. And now that's why we adapted so many different types of cows. You saw the stabilisers and that coming in the last number of years, because everybody's looking for milk as well, and everybody seems to have the system. We've now got so many breeds and types, more breeds and types based on how many cows we've got than anywhere in the world. We've got every day. We've got all the different varieties of wherever we're going, and so you go and say, well, what's the ideal cow? Well, the ideal cow is basically whatever suits your system best. But you've got to make sure and say to yourself, if I've got good fertility, I've got good milk, we're weaning, weights, I've got good level of fat if they're out winching, whatever it is, locomotion, as Robert talked about, their foraging ability, their legs, and they can calve within 410 days, then there's good cows for you. But the guy that will probably out wintering will be looking for a different type of cow than the guy that says, I can't outwinter, but I want to produce these cows within the slatted courts or the buildings what I have. They'll look for the size difference and things like that, and that's what they're looking for. But it is a case of whatever suits your system. And I think we've been guilty in the past that when we have subsidies and we're just going for production, we never really cared hugely too much about it. There was more of a focus in the terminal type cow. You went for weight and whatever it was doing. Now we're far, far more suited to the types of breeding that we are developing. So I always think that sometimes folk can be quite critical of the industry and say, oh, they need to breed this, they need to breed that. It's happening. It's happening all the time. We keep getting grievance about people saying, oh, the age of slaughter is too high. It's not. If you go and look, it's coming down all the time. It's coming down. Give folk a chance here. The industry, it's not easy. Beef industry is a bit like a cruise liner compared to speedboat. Speedboat is very much like the sheep industry or arable. If you muck it up, you plough it away, you go again. So it's a speedboat. Sheep, well, you can put to the tops in October, November, and you're selling by May, June. Beef's a long cruise liner, and it takes time to adapt, and we are doing that, but we can't have market signals moving all the time while we're in a longer term plan. But it's a question you're always going to ask about breed types and that. That's why I love when I get asked to go and speak at meetings, that it's maybe the Aberdeen-Angus Cattle Society or the Sires. You know you're only talking about them that night. But if you're going to a commercial meeting, it could go anywhere.
Robert, a question for you. Does size matter?
Oh, you're not going to play that game again, are you? Yeah, it does. It does, because going back to Gav's point earlier, we're at 420 kilos kind of maximum. So, genetics-wise, I'm 6'3", my son's cleared 6 foot, my daughter's not far behind him. We're big gets. Genetics will produce what you get. So, same in livestock, same in cattle. So if our slaughter weight is maximum, well, you probably better say maximum 400, so you've got a bit of drift and a bit of room to play with 420. Really, if you've got talking 400 kilos, and realistically, most steers will mature out about their mother's body weight. So 400 at 55 kilo, that's a 727 kilo cow. You're not really needing to be much more as that in terms of cow weight. Now, that's at body condition 2.5. That's the other bit. When folks say, I weighed my cows and they're all this weight and that weight, yeah, but when did you weigh them? And what, like a strip were they in? Because a 720 kilo cow that's 6 foot tall and lean as a crow is a completely different animal to a 5 foot tall thing that's as mud fat. So, I think we've also got to be quite clear on that piece as well. It's not just about weight. It's also about actual physical stature. And again, back to that cracking piece, fat, and being able to manipulate or to manage within that. So, somebody that said, well, listen to this and hear, 720 kilo cow. Well, sure, I weighed mine at weaning time last year and they were all 800 kilos, but they might have been mud fat. So they could easily be 720 kilo cows. They've just not corrected the weight back to what they were, to that condition score 2.5. And likewise at the bottom end as well, we talk a lot about the efficiency of keeping that cow, and a smaller cow is a lot easier to keep because, they do need less feed. It's a very simple equation for maintenance. It is basically based on the body weight for the number of megajoules you need for maintenance. So a smaller cow takes less feed. However, that smaller cow will also produce a smaller carcass. And once you go down below that 200, they punish you at 250, but realistically, once you go below 270, you're getting down into carcasses that are not yielding out in a balance that the processor is going to get paid for. And it's a very difficult piece trying to balance that out. But I think if it were me, I think a 675 to 725 kilo cow at 2.5 body conditions, you're not going to go far wrong.
Amazingly, I'm going to back Robert up here in his spot.
Jeez, I'm glad this has been recorded, Gav.
We did a series of work a few years ago with some big farms and that, and we found once a cow's got to 710, 715, that was the optimal. After that, cow efficiency went away. The calf size at weaning time against the mature cow size was never going to equate. But it's actually weight. It's okay saying weight and size, but it's actually what it's able to produce.
Yeah.
Now, quite rightly so, Robert's saying about 500, 450, 500 kilo cow. If that's going to be low maintenance, whatever it is, but sometimes it doesn't produce a big calf. It doesn't produce a big calf, then you've got to do your costings again, because you're not going to get it maybe an output, but you'll certainly maybe get it with better fertility, costs or whatever it is. But we've also got, we did actually 14 years ago, we did a report for the blue-grey cattle group. And some of the net margins they were coming away with was phenomenal what they're able to do, because they were actually only at 500 to 550 kilo of a cow. But by crikey, at weaning time, they were producing Charlie calves that were way up, 280, 300 kilos, which made their cow efficiency really, really good. And I remember some farmers would say to me, some finishers would say, I'll buy that Charlie Gavin, but it'll never get to the weight I want it to get to. Well, it'll change now. So actually now they find that's the right type of calf to get them to the weight they need to do. Going to the 500 kilo dead weights, now 400. But when you find there is absolutely no use, if this cow gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it gets 800, 900 kilos, and the calf at foot is not produced in any way, it could be well below 30, 35% in cow efficiency. That's not good. But what we've also got to remember is every area is different. Because we did some work a number of years ago when we were up in the area of Murray and Elgin, where all the cattle, Kirsten, as you well know, quite a lot of them are outwintered in that. We actually looked at what the cost was to feed them, the stubbles and the kale and the straw, on a per day basis, 800 kilos, and found it was cheaper than the 500 kilo, 550 kilo cow in the West Coast, where the feed more or less had to be made of silage and bought in. So it's always making sure you've got the right area and for the right cow of what you're doing to do that as well. So it is a case of balancing it as well. Go into some of these areas up north with the big Simmental type cow, but they can feed them relatively cheaper and still produce good size in that. But we've got to watch in certain areas where you've got large cattle, that's going to become too costly to do it. You've got to know your area and what you're doing.
I think another part that we maybe missed there with the things that we want in the cows, or the attributes that we want, I don't think we spoke about temperament. And I think temperament is becoming such a big thing. Well, it's always been a big thing, but more so with reduced labour on farms, lone working. I think that's a huge part. I don't know if you guys agree with that as well.
Hugely. Well, I think there's two aspects to it, or three aspects to it, Kirsten. You've got part one, which is the labour aspect. And to me, you've almost got a liability there in terms of, if you know that cow's pretty flighty and somebody gets nailed, you actually have a liability there for what could happen to that person. And there's really no excuse for holding on to these things, because if they are a bit tonto, realistically, they ain't going to perform well either. There was work out of Australia, I think it was either 0.15 or 0.2 of a kilo a day from animals of poorer temperament, 0.15, 0.2 a kilo a day less performance from animals that were poorer temperament. So not only have you got an animal that is dangerous, you've also got something that's picking your pocket versus the one that's a bit like myself, a bit more laid back and chunky. It's a whole different ballgame. And so I think that's a huge part of it as well, is really trying to get that bit sorted out, because there's no need. As Gavin said way back, you can turn a cow over and put a heifer back in her place today for pretty much zero. So there's absolutely zero excuse for keeping a hold of these things. And not just those, but don't forget, if it's in the cat, it's in the kittens, as one of our members used to say to me. If the cow's a bit touchy or the bull's a bit touchy, there's a fair likelihood the progeny are going to be as well. So don't be keeping progeny out of them either.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Kirsten, you made a very good point earlier on. I think farmers are more and more aware now of cow's temperament. They haven't got the time. They're quite often out there themselves. And that's what we're looking at. There's less labour wanting to work with the cattle, so there's more breeding types have been developed now, so it's easier calving, it can be easier handled and that, and it's the time involved as well. But, I think one of the good things about the cow price at the moment is quite often, there's a case of legs are not right, others not like, temperament's not right. They don't hang back now and putting them away. And I think farmers, again, naturally have developed into that as well. Temperament's always an interesting one, because I think farmers know the temperament of their cattle. And it's always down to, if you're going to work with your cattle and you're there all the time in amongst them, well, the natural environment is, and the way they react is, they'll probably work with you better. But if you want to stick a 200 types, certain breeds, 200 of them, put them up on top of the hill and never see them that much, well, they'll naturally go back to their own state of being prairie wild, because they're not used to people. But it just makes a difference when you're working with them. So there's a temperament EBV, but temperament EBV, I'm heavily involved in it as well, will take time to develop and things like that. But any trait can help, but is something. But farmers are good at knowing their own cattle. I think, as we said, by the price of cows and that, I think more and more folk taking them out. Folk will always say to me, there's certain breeds and all that, they're always a bit high temperament, but I refer back to what I was talking about. You work with them, they're fine.
I think actually, Gavin, that's a great point, and it's something that I have seen guys in the past do. Is not only are we not maybe handling them on the hill so much, but when the calves come off them, they then come into a shed, the bedder drives past them, the feeder wagon drives past them, but nobody's actually among them. And I mean, I would know 2 or 3 finishers who, despite the fact that they don't actually have to manually bed or manually feed, will still go and walk through every pen of cattle every day, just as it takes the edge off them, takes the sting off them, and it just keeps that, keeps them a bit calmer. And I think it is something we do maybe forget a wee bit, is that we've mechanised things because we haven't got the labour, but we've also taken the person away from the animal, so they are that bit more spiky when they do see a person. So we do also have to take a look at what we've done in these situations too, and what we can also do to ameliorate it. So taking a walk through the cattle, and there are things we can do to solve the problems.
I can't back up, Robert, enough of the amount of tremendous good stockmen that will continually say to us that sometimes they feel like finishing cattle, store cattle, and a few cows have got a bit worse. And that's simply what they talk about as straw bedders, that are just hammering the straw and on top of them that, and they're not with them and all that kind of thing. They just said that makes a big, big difference. We're less with them, but these straw bedders they're great machines, but they say that sometimes the cattle are not what they were.
Yeah. Just not used to the same human contact as they would have been. And it's the same when you go out and check them in the park in your buggy or your quad bike. Yeah. It's not a lot actually go out on foot, is there? No. And I guess with technology, I'm a big fan of technology, but I guess the downside of it as well, if you're moving their brake fence on your phone rather than physically going and moving fence posts, it's another interaction they're missing out on, I guess.
Absolutely.
Great point.
Yeah. If we move to the bull, I wonder, so we've kind of spoken about the cow and what we're looking for. What about matching the sire? So we've got breeding, we've got finishing, we've got store, we've got West Coast, we've got East Coast. There's a lot to fathom out here.
Well, for an industry of less than 400,000 cows, we've got a hell of a lot of choices to make, haven't we?
We do. What is it? Are we 100 breeds? Have we got as far as that yet?
I think the last BCMS lot I saw was mid-70s.
It's a lot.
But even that, I mean, look, I'll throw the plug in. There's only need for one, but well, anyway, we'll not lean too heavily on that. But but no, I mean, in all seriousness, it's back to what we talked about back there. Where are you and where are you going? And it's not just in terms of location, but I mean in terms of what does the herd look like. And I think the bit that's come back to just a minute ago was, we do have a lot of data sources available to us now. Gavin was saying about the docility EBVs are coming through, and we're certainly working on that side of things, and we've got lots of EBVs for things. But we also have lots of data in My Herd Stats, and your vet records, and your accounts. There's a lot of information there that you can pull on to sit down and figure out what it is you are, where you are, and what's next. So, I think identifying what is your market and then trying to produce towards that is a good start point.
Yeah, I think we've talked about. I think Robert and we've talked about 20 years. They often say with different.
I'm not that old, Gav.
Often the biggest differences are within the breeds rather than between the breeds. Kirsten, being really honest, what I've felt over the last number of years is certain breeds of bulls are here to do specific jobs and they do them well. If you want to crossbreed by putting one breed over the other, that's when you get hybrid vigour, and that's where you get the benefit of coming in. But why, oh why, do certain breeds want to try and bring in so many different traits and attributes into their own breed that maybe jeopardises what they're known for? We will avoid any specific picking on breeds, but if you've got good breeds that are known for their good, their milk, their motility, their fat cover and all that, that offer a very good maternal type, then why do you want to introduce some other muscle or whatever it is brought into them and growth and things like that? Muscle and fat never really like each other, and all of a sudden you're trying to achieve everything within your one breed. Leave that to the crisscrossing of other breeds to be working with you. Or before we know, we're seeing what's the difference between some of these breeds. I think it's very, very well summarised by a chap a number of years ago, an excellent chap called Roy McNee from the Ling Cattle Society, and says, we're here to breed the cattle for the sale ring, not the show ring. And it stands tall, that. But I'm very critical that I think some breeds have decided to go and look for other attributes and have caused divisions within their own breed and what they're trying to do. And what's not helped is, it's good to look at, but when we were looking at myostatins were set up to look at, do you, Robert, remember the Coullards and the Charlies and all that, because of the great difficulties they had in certain areas with calving and things like that. But when other breeds are looking at that and said, oh, wait a minute, we can identify it and we can actually look to be bringing some of this back into our breed, I don't agree with it. I don't see what they're trying to achieve. There is people that will listen to this that will say, look, Gavin, let the market dictate. It's up to them what they want to do. But I think sometimes you're narrowing down your selection by trying to go that way.
And it's interesting when you look at other countries, like Robert, I guess with America, like they don't have a lot of breeds, do they? And the uniformity within that is so different from what we have here.
I think I was out in Australia at the World Angus Forum in May.
We weren't invited, Kirsten.
I know. I remember that.
My hand baggage was full anyway, Gav. You wouldn't have fitted. Speaking to the Australians, to the Americans, and to some others, their industry is 80% Angus, both in Australia and Australia's topping off a bit. There's more Wagyu coming in there, but the US is 80% Angus. It's a huge market dominance, and there is consistency there. But at the same time, I think it's a hybrid vigour. You can find hybrid vigour within breeds as well, as Gavin said. You can get some real outcross genetics within your own breed to sometimes square things away. So I think breeding is just the most fascinating thing, because whatever you think you're going to get, Mother Nature turns around and says, no, you're not getting that. It can be quite quite fun and games sometimes. But to go back to your original question on what it is you're looking for a bull, I think that's just, we can't forget what it is that we're actually producing at the end of the day, and we are producing a food product, and we have to maintain that piece. And Gavin said it right back at the start, we are a premium product, so we really want to try and make sure that we maintain that premium product. So we do have to make sure that whatever it is we're breeding something that somebody at the end is going to want to eat a bit of it.
I think when Robert's talking about, quite rightly so, you go to Australia, you go to America and things like that. When you go to there, you're seeing these abattoirs and they're taking 5,000 Anguses in tomorrow, and they're peas in a pod. There might be 5,000 Herefords at some time. Let's see, there's other breeds available, stabilised, whatever it is, but they're dealing with the numbers, and that creates a fantastic uniformity to start. You've got the feedlots are all in the same feed. Again, uniformity. If you look at actually one of the things at the moment is beef from the dairy, is extremely good uniformity, because it's an Angus Wagyu or a British Blue out of either a Holstein or a Friesian. So it's very uniform what they're coming in there with numbers. But because we're working with so many breeds and types, you're finding that a lot of abattoirs will get 20 of that breed and shape and size one day, 30 of that, 10 of this, 10 of that. So how do we bring in uniformity? Even sometimes we don't even have the start line. We're not in the start line. So that's something that we've always brought up. As you said there, Kirsten, you go to these other countries and they don't have many breeds, but they have extreme uniformity, and that really helps the whole process through the abattoir, right to the processor and right to the retailer.
But then they probably don't have the same mix of land as what we do. They don't
That's
have
a
the
great
extreme
point.
hills down to the lowlands, do they?
That's a great point, Kirsten. Absolutely. So much of us as Belfast and things like that. What would a difference of when you're up in the West Coast compared to you're in the East Lothian or down in the borders? But we still have such a variety. that's going on. However, things move on all the time. You see our finishers getting bigger. There's maybe more uniformity coming in because it's lying in the hands of very few nowadays that they can feed and type when they're putting them away, a certain uniformity on them.
Yeah. I would like to finish off. I'd like you both to get your crystal balls out, please, and think forward to the next 10 to 20 years. And what do you think the Scottish beef industry is going to look like?
Okay. I think what we can never get away from is the fact that all agricultural produce goes in cycles. And so, we're up in the high at the minute, but we will go back down again. But I'd like to think if you say the 20-year horizon, we'll probably see a top, a bottom, and a top again in that time. I think the herd decline is probably starting to finish its run. I think we'll see a consolidation probably in about the sort of herd size we have now. We'll probably see a bit of a hollowing out of the middle. We'll see maybe less of the 80 to 150 cow farms, and probably see maybe some smallers and some biggers. I think that's kind of you've seen it happen in the sheep, you've seen it happen in the arable. The veg, the pigs, the poultry, they've all gone through the same sort of thing. I think we might see the same. I mean, the dairy as well. So I can see that probably coming into the beef as well. That we'll see big units and single individual units, and we'll not see so much of the sort of man and a half type units. I'd like to say all black as long as I'm wearing this tie, but we can't just maybe get quite as excited as that. But I think there's a good future for lots of the breeds, and I think the consumers also kind of coming back round on our side as well. Much of the work shows that most vegans revert to meat eating within 5 years anyway. So let them have a wee 5-year hiatus. As long as they eat well when they get back, we'll be quite happy to welcome them back. So I think we'll continually ride that wave of coming and going. But it's hard to predict what beef will do in itself without looking at the real broad landscape. As I say, we're in a cyclical industry. You've got the pig cycle, you've got the chicken cycle, you've got the poultry. All these different things will go cyclically, and all these different pieces drive each other. If you think about where we are at the minute with milk, who'd have thought 12 months ago that you'd hear a spot milk getting knocked about at 10 pence a litre, but it is. So that's going to have an impact on the beef trade over the next 12, 24 months, as you've got more dairy cows getting culled, probably as guys are trying to reduce their production. And then you're going to have probably more dairy cows getting put to beef semen because guys are seeing less need for replacements as they kind of consolidate their dairy herd. But then once that goes to its end, probably 3 to 5 years out, maybe a wee bit beyond that, well, the milk price will correct. It'll all start going back up again, and guys will start milking more cows. So suddenly it'll starve the beef sector of beef calves because they put more cows in, and the beef price will go up again. I mean, as the old Chinese proverb said, may you live in interesting times.
But the cattle become in the hands of fewer and fewer all the time. At the moment, 54% of our cattle are only on 16% of the holdings. You see it happening all the time. You see it following what the dairy industry is doing as well. And that's when they'll hold more power. And it doesn't matter if it's a producer or a finisher. Maybe the finishers will probably get bigger and bigger quicker. But the hands are very few in what they're doing. But I think what I want to see, and I really think it's coming forward more, is that cattle are not, it's going to be seen over the next 5-10 years, not the problem. They're part of the solution, as everybody talks about as well. And when everybody talks about their ability in climate change, biodiversity, the environment, net zero, for these guys to achieve these goals, they need the cattle to do it. So the cattle will be there to achieve two things, their environmental biodiversity part, but they'll also be there to produce meat. And it's the world's wanting meat. In the world situation where consumption is going to grow by 12%, so is production. So we're still going to be short. As Europe's diminishing at the moment, the other countries are building. So you're going to see that, very hands are very few. But I also what I see very much coming forward now is a very much good fight back of what the ability is of cattle and that. Look at the work that John Gilliland from Ireland's doing with QMS and these other bodies. He's proving now, and he's showing, and these researchers and scientists are listening to him now. These are the people that I think will come through now that will realise that they have a big, big future in industry. But we need investment as well, and we need to have confidence in it. As farmers would also say, we need to make sure that we've got the back of the politicians, the Scottish Government, whoever it is, all these government bodies. We need to be in this together.
I think as well, we keep hearing that the population is growing, that the global population is expanding, isn't it? At the same time that we've got a huge deficit in protein, again, globally. And protein, like just now, it's quite a phase, isn't it? Everything, people are counting grams of protein, and you see various bars and such like, and it's all what protein is there.
Yeah. Why
So
do you think we've got how many people now, and you see in Scotland and UK, are putting in hen sheds for eggs, cheap form of protein? More and more looking at that now as well, because we've got to do it. But as I said to you, Europe may look as though it's going down in numbers, but look at the world situation. That demand from the Asian Chinese market is huge as they get more affluent. They would
And
like
don't forget
all the
about
people.
Africa. Don't forget about Africa. You know, it's the only place left still to have population boom, and it's coming. Nigeria's birth rate is apparently just past the EU's.
we've also got a lot of new tech that's coming in that might help a little bit with our deficit in labour. Using drones to check hill cows, using your collars, um, helping with fertility, even with your boluses. Like there's a lot of stuff kind of coming that could drive the change further within the industry as well. I myself see it's quite exciting. I think there's what do they say, when there's challenge, there's opportunity, and I think there's definite opportunity. With, you've both said, the confidence that's in the sector as well. That kind of motivates people when you get your good prices. It motivates people to think to next year, to invest in better genetics, to think about barley and soya is pretty cheap at the moment. People are looking at their rations. They're thinking about feed efficiency. They're thinking about profitability. I think it's an exciting time, and I hope there's some new blood comes in and sees cows as an opportunity. Quite often we have new entrants that look at sheep because sheep are lower capital cost to get into and such like. But when at the same time, when you see the opportunity there is there with cattle, it's just a big capital outlay to get there, isn't it?
Absolute technology, and it's the young people that are bringing that on board. But we need to have the young people encouraged to come into the industry. See, at the moment when they say a young person that can go and they go and study and they get farms, that's not an opportunity to do that. You need millions to start off that. We need people to get opportunities, and opportunities could come from farms and estates where the farmer says, "Well, I haven't got the succession, but I want to still have the farm." And well, give some young people the opportunity to come in on contract basis, and that's how you get the start, and that's how industry can prosper.
As well with like big estates or vast areas of land that are unmanaged, brilliant opportunity to bring maybe a
Absolutely.
new person, some cattle, thinking of biodiversity gains, and some of the tech all combined. There's definite opportunities.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good one.
and the other bit is different models. You know, I mean, let's not forget about the likes of Duncan Morrison. You know, you can lease cows. You don't have to own cows. And if you've got somebody who's not on the herd basis looking to get out, it's probably quite a cost-effective way for them to get out over time, leasing their cows to a new entrant coming in, and it's not capital intensive then. You know, I think the opportunities are vast, but as you say, Kirsten, we just need to look at it a wee bit different and just change things up a bit.
I think Robert really nailed it there. Opportunity is a great thing to have, but there's so many good people round about here that are really trying to develop and look in a way to try and make their business more profitable. And I just find the benefit of just getting out and going to these places to see what they're doing rather than hearing about it, seeing what they're doing. People like when I got invited to go up to see Duncan Morrison's farm and stuff like that, just an eye opener to see that quite often it's not a specialist and all that can transfer the knowledge. It's these guys, you learn from these guys, and then when you come and go to the next meeting, you've got an idea, and they'll say, "Where'd you get that idea from?" Well, probably the farm you visited the day before or a week before. It's just transferring that knowledge and just showing everybody what can be achieved. But remember, as you said, Kirsten, not everybody's got the same type and climate. Not everybody can do one thing against the other thing.
Yeah.
So you're saying, Gavin, you've just built your career on stealing other folks' ideas?
Basically, transferring the knowledge. Transferring the knowledge, Robert.
That's all it is.
I think what we're seeing there is the future is bright. The future is exciting, which I think is a lovely way actually to finish off our podcast today. So thank you both very much. I will look back on this in 10 years' time and see if you were both correct as well and see where the industry is at. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kirsten.
Cheers out.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Stock Talk. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and follow our show. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, you may enjoy some of our other Farm Advisory Service podcasts. This podcast was presented by me, Kirsten Williams, produced by Heather Stewart, edited by Kieran Sim, with executive producers Kirsten Blackwood and Kerry Hammond. Come back next time for more Stock Talk.
The Farm Advisory Service Podcast. Audio advice on livestock, crops and soils, environment, rural business, and more. Brought to you in association with the Scottish Government.